Mycah Pittman could be heading to the University of Utah very soon, and so could a couple of talented tight ends. We're talking about that and more on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We're available on all platforms, including YouTube and any podcast feed and format you guys may be in search of. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, we're going to be diving into transfer portal news as it relates to players coming into Utah. There's a couple of receivers rumored to be committing to the team, a couple of really talented tight ends that the Utah football team was also interested, especially early on when the portal cycle was just getting going. Could also be interested in coming back to Utah. So we're going to discuss all of that today and finish it out with some news on some former Utes who were awarded some recent great opportunities and just awarded a nice award. But that's at the end of the show. As I said, first, let's talk receivers, because that was the big thing that Coach Witt, Ludwig, both of them kind of spoke on. Is they like the guys they have in the room, but they might be looking to see if they can get a little bit more in the transfer portal. And something I said was, I like the guys that Utah has in their room. I do not feel like wide receiver is a need for this team, especially when you look at it. Only 5 receivers caught a pass on this Utah football team last year. I feel like the 5 guys they got are fine. This is a Utah football team that we know still wants to run the ball. Who's going to be the main target? Var'Keyes, of course. I really like Devon Vele too, and I liked what Money Parks flashed along with Thomas Yasmin. Those will be the 4 main pass catchers, but can always get better, and injuries are always a huge part of things. We saw how Yasmin had to step up after Brant got hurt early on last year, and we also just saw the evolution of the receiver room when Solomon Enos wasn't producing as we had hoped kind of throughout the season. That's where Money Parks really came in and stepped up and made some huge plays for this team. Some of the biggest ones being against USC with that 49-yard catch, and then of course in the Pac-12 championship game, we turned that 3rd and 19 into a touchdown, courtesy of some horrendous tackling by the Trojans as well. But speaking of those Trojans, Mycah Pittman was one of the former great receivers for them that he's now on the Indianapolis Colts. His younger brother, Mycah Pittman, 5'11", 211 in terms of height and weight, is in the portal currently. He was a Florida State guy. Now is going to be after Florida State first, then Oregon, and now a very interesting situation because 24/7 has crystal balled him to Utah. He just recently entered the portal after spring ball. And as I mentioned, he is at the moment 100% the crystal ball predictions to where he's going to go in terms of 24/7. And what they do this is to Utah. Trejan Bridges is the same way. His crystal ball is also 100% to Utah. But let's focus on Pittman and what he could bring to the team. When you talk about Pittman, you're talking about a guy who started his career at Oregon. First couple of years there, was even a contributor on their Rose Bowl team back in 2019 with Justin Herbert. His first year of college had 18 receptions, 227 yards, 2 touchdowns. Second, only 8 receptions, 123, 0 touchdowns. 2021, 12 for 197, no touchdowns. But then last year with the Seminoles, put together some strong games, especially against Wake Forest. 32 receptions, 330 yards, averaged over 10 yards a catch, as he has all of his seasons in college, and 3 touchdowns overall, with 2 of them coming in that game against Wake Forest. A couple other thoughts I had just watching some tape on Pittman. I think he's a really good route runner. I think he's a great threat in the red zone, good at making contested catches, does a good job adjusting to the ball in the air and tracking it as well. He's also an explosive returner. So I'm going to return a couple punts for the Seminoles last year to really good success. And this is a guy who, as I mentioned, he's a former 4-star, really successful, and he's made some spectacular one-handed grabs too. If you search his name up, some of the highlights that are come up with a defender draped all over him, and he's using that other hand to haul in an improbable catch. So my thoughts on Pittman is, yeah, this would be a great addition to this team. This is a really talented guy, and I think he would push the other guys in the room. This is a guy too that Utah wouldn't be like, oh, we're going to promise you playing time. He'd have to come in and compete. I think it'd be interesting to see how he factors into that 3rd receiver race with other transfers like an Emery Simmons, like true freshman Mikey Matthews, like Makai Cope, who's been with this team for a few years now. So I think adding Mycah would be really interesting, but I like the dynamics he could bring, especially as an explosive returner. I had high hopes for Devon Vele back there last season, and I think some of that was more relating to blocking. Now, I will say the most important thing Vele never did was he never dropped a ball. So I think that is very important, obviously, is to make sure you are just retaining possession. Yes, you want to return. Everyone wants to get back to a Britton Covey. Having that element is such a vital part to an explosive offense. But either way, overall, I feel like that it would be nice to get more explosive, and that's where I really think adding a guy like Pittman could really help the punt return team for this Utah football team and help them get a little bit more diverse in that regard. Where, look, last year, if you punted the ball to Utah, you knew maybe Vele would get you 10 yards, but Pittman, a more explosive guy, I think he could really help out there. And as I said, I think he is a good route runner. I think he could contribute in the slot and maybe a little on the outside too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And of course, the other guy we've been talking about earlier this week is a Trejan Bridges, the 6'1", 180, former 5-star guy, gone from, was originally an Oklahoma guy, then had the allegations and everything that come up there. And as I discussed on Monday's show with Sammy Mora, if the coaches feel confident after talking to the person and the player that those charges and everything that's happened, his court hearing actually isn't until August. If they feel that that's not going to be an issue, if they feel like he's past it, if they feel like he's even maybe innocent just based on what they've talked to him about, all of that, I will leave that up to the coaches and I trust their decision. I'm not here to pass judgment on a situation I don't know anything about. But just talking about the on the field stuff, Bridges is exceptionally talented when you watch his tape. I mean, he's a former 5-star. That speaks for itself. And Pittman, obviously a former 4-star and has quite the NFL bloodlines too. And look, some guys got the NFL bloodlines, but then you turn it on the tape and you're like, he's not like them. But Pittman is. I think Pittman is, or in terms of, he is like them in terms of he's a talented football player. He's obviously not going to be Mycah Pittman, I don't think, in the NFL level. There's a reason he's going to be on his third team. But I think he's a very good receiver who contribute to the success for this Utah football team. So should the team add them? I think absolutely yes. I think if you can get both of them, you should, because these are the talented level guys that will make the other guys in the room better and can help you make your football team better this season. So I absolutely think it's worth adding both these guys to the team. I think they could both do some really positive things overall, and I think they would really contribute to this Utah football team, how making this passing attack more diverse offensively. We've seen some other transfer players come in and make a huge impact, right? Dalton Kincaid and what he's been able to do. We've seen a ton of guys on the defensive side of the ball. We've also seen some not work, and that's kind of the risk reward with the transfer, right? You can even look at someone like Tavion. Look, kind of got him in from the JUCO route. Great in 2021. Obviously didn't have that type of a season in 2022. So I think these are very talented receivers for this team. I think it's nice too that Coach Whitted is kind of getting to talk with these guys, like bringing the receivers he wants to the room as well, the players and types that he wants to work with. And I think it would be great for the team. As I said, I just feel like you can never get too explosive on the outside. Originally, earlier this week, I said I thought the team would only bring in one to two guys, maybe, and maybe Sam. I think Sammy was the one who said that she thought the team would bring in even more, and that's more now looking so like it's what it's going to be overall. So I do think for this Utah football team, I think this would be great to add some more talented, explosive receivers, some guys who've played college football, have played against Pac-12 defenses, they know what Oregon, some of those guys on Oregon are guys Pittman used to face off against in practice. Bridges is a really talented player. Going back to his Oklahoma days, we know what he can do too. So once again, both these guys, really sensational offensive weapons coming in. If they play, great. If not, I'm still not like direly concerned about the receiver room, because Utah once again has won the Pac-12 back-to-back years, and neither year have they had this dominant outside receiver. Vele was very good. I think he was one of the 10 best receivers in the Pac-12 last year, but wasn't one of the top 5. And once again, Utah didn't need that because they had the best pass catcher overall in the Pac-12 last year at tight end. And I expect them to have that once again this coming season. And speaking of tight ends, we're going to talk about some tight ends in a moment. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our friends at Built Bar. Looking for a delicious snack but don't want all the sugar and calories? Then you need the best tasting protein bar ever. Built, you got to try this. If you're like me and you want to make healthier snack choices but you don't want to compromise on taste, then I've got just the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs. Built Bars are healthy and taste amazing. Seriously, they taste so amazing you won't think they're good for you, but you got to try this. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're all covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real dark chocolate. And they come in unbelievably great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is they're healthy, only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait to get a box. For years, we've talked about ordering Built bars at Built.com, but now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, while you can still get your specialty flavors still at Built.com. So once again, head to Sam's Club. Also, you guys can go to your local Smith's out here in Utah. So make sure you guys go to Smith's or Sam's Club to pick up your box of Built bars today. Lots of options there, or you can still head to Built.com. So make sure you guys check out those awesome offers from our friends at Built Bar. So just talked about those important receivers the Utah football team might be adding. Could also be adding some talented tight ends. Let's look at the tight end position for the Utes. One guy they were interested in was Var'Keyes, who was a North Texas guy who was originally committed to Arkansas as recently, I believe it was April 21st or 23rd, and then decommitted less than 2 weeks later. So wasn't really feeling the Sam Pittman vibes, I guess, after spending a little bit more time up there. Just whatever happened, had a falling out. But Gums did sensational things in Conference USA and for North Texas. His first year, he redshirted in 2021, but before that, he broke out, finishing Conference USA as a first-team pick, as well as a multiple freshman All-American selection. He totaled 34 catches for 458 yards and 5 touchdowns during the 2022 seasons. The one thing I think that he would fit in right away with the Utah tight ends is he is an exceptional athlete. You can tell he's a guy who can take the top off the defense, or I shouldn't say take the top off the defense a little bit. That's kind of reserved for obviously special deep receivers, but can kind of work that deep middle of the field, can work down the sideline and make some nice catches too. But, normally tight ends, you think of those guys as just 10 to 15 yards. I think he's a guy who can make a catch 20 plus yards down the field. And then because of his athleticism, shake out of some of those tackles. He is a good route runner. He set the North Texas tight end record for receiving yards and catches. These guys 6'3", 230. So when you're talking about Gums as a guy with 3 years of eligibility still left, and I think this is what the transfer portal was created for, right? To give players like Gums the opportunity when they outperform their current situation to then go to another school, level up, and see what they can do there. Because Gums, all these guys, their dream is to play in the NFL. The best way to do that is to play against the best, and you want to have a chance to win at the highest level. You do that by transferring and moving on. So I think this is a good decision by Gums. And obviously, look, Arkansas just must have not been the right fit for him. And this is a guy Utah really wanted. So it's going to be interesting to see. They'll talk with him, bring him in, see if the fit is good. And I'm curious to see. And I personally, I would love to see this happen. I don't know how many of you guys know this. I actually went to North Texas for a year before I transferred for Utah for my 3 years to finish up. So I would love to see a former North Texas Mean Green Eagles guy come up to the Utes. And I think it's an athletic tight end like this would be another great addition to the tight end room. But he's not the only guy the team could be bringing in, because Seydou Traore, I apologize if I mispronounced that, was a guy that it's really feel like it came down to Utah, Colorado, and there was one other team for his services going back to like that January before spring ball really got going. And he ended up deciding to go to Colorado, sent spring ball with the Buffs, and was one of their many players in the kind of the mass exodus that's going on up in Boulder that ended up leaving. Traore is 6'3", 233. And, Tim Brewster, who's the tight end coach at Colorado, actually had this big rant of talking to the media, kind of talking about Traore. And this was when he was still on the team, just kind of talking about how like, hey, he's really talented. He's just right now, he's more of a receiver and not as much of a blocker. And sounds like they really want him to play both ways. And there were some other things mentioned in there about like taking reps off and stuff like that, or just bringing the consistency every day, that I was very surprised to hear a coach kind of talk about a player in that regard. But that is what Tim Brewster decided to do in that situation. And it kind of lost them Traore, I think, in a large part of the reason. So look, Traore is an exceptionally talented tight end. He was a top 30 player in the transfer portal, according to 24/7. Because at Arkansas State, he had 50 catches for 655 yards and 4 touchdowns. Another really athletic tight end, good hands, big catch radius, tough over the middle of the field. So, look, when you talk about Gums and also Traore, these are two very talented pass catchers. And look, if you want to be a tight end and excel, there's not many offenses that allow you to do that more than Utah's. So, should Utah add them? They should try to. If I was Gums and Traore, would I want to come to Utah right now? If I'm just being completely honest, I would be a little nervous, because I'm looking at it like, if you transferring somewhere, you want to be the starter or be the number 2 guy. And that's going to be very hard to do with this Utah football team, obviously. Now, look, maybe they'll sell them and spin it on a way of like, hey, we're going to have 3 tight ends who are extremely productive here. And look, Utah uses a lot of their 3 tight ends, but that third guy, Logan Kendall last year, Mickey Suguturaga, who we expect that to be this year, is mostly a blocker. He's only going to catch 1 ball every 2 to 3 games, basically. So it's just not a lot of production out of that third spot. If everything goes right and everyone's healthy, it's going to be Var'Keyes. And we've heard a lot about how difficult this offense is to work. So it could even be hard for both these guys to pass Thomas Yasmin, who's also done some sensational things for this Utah football team. So I'm very interested to see. I think it would be great if this team, once again, you can't add, it's not like you can have enough talent. Like if you have an opportunity to add talent, you continue to add talent, because that is the right thing to do. And it's what's best for your team and franchise. But I do think this is a situation where if you're Gums and Traore, you might want to look somewhere else where there is more of a tight end need or a tight end opening, because then you don't have to compete to, at best, probably be the number 2 guy. I mean, Brant Keithy is him, for lack of a better word, right? Like, he is a monster. If he is healthy and ready to go, him and man, I can't wait to watch him and Brock Bowers, like, see who leads the nation in tight end receiving yards, the Brock Bowers being the talented Georgia tight end. Like, Keithy, when he's back and full ready to go, he's one of the best tight ends who's ever come through Utah and one of the best tight ends in college football we've seen the past few seasons. So Gums and Traore, they're both exceptionally talented. They're not beating him out for the top tight end spot. Then number 2, you're in a race with Thomas Yasmin, but it's a competitive race. And that's not even mentioning, look, like I said, Gums and Traore are all talented than these other guys I'm going to name, but these are just the other bodies in the tight end room. You got Munir McClain, who's also a talented tight end. Isaac Asiata and Noah Benny are kind of the recruits this team brought in, the younger guys kind of waiting in the wings. So it is a crowded room. And as I said, I think if Gums and Traore come in, at best they'd be the 2, and at worst one of those guys would be the 4. But do you really want to be tight end 4 when you can go somewhere else and be tight end 2 or tight end 3? I would imagine not. So I think it's going to be awesome if Utah can land one of these guys. The interesting thing when we're talking about this situation versus the receivers is it does sound like Utah is going to be able to land Pittman and Bridges, which makes sense, right? You normally, even though Utah only had 5 receivers catch a pass, I assume they've talked about wanting to be more explosive for a while. And I assume when you have guys like this, you're going to try to air it out a little bit more to those receivers, do even more 3 receiver sets, maybe some even 4 receiver sets. So I do think it makes sense why Bridges and a guy in Pittman would both see the appeal in coming out and joining this Utah team versus, as I mentioned, I just think it's hard to bring in 2 really talented tight ends in the same transfer class because then it's like, even when teams use 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, like Keithy's already here. Like, so once again, it's just a crowded tight end room. So if Utah gets one of these guys, I think it's great. If they get neither of that, if they get both of them, through the moon. If they get neither one of them, I don't think it's a reason for concern because once again, Utah will have one of the best 1-2 tight end punches in the nation. Once again, off the top of my head, they got the best. I mean, Darnell Washington, I'm trying to remember now, the Georgia tight end who's an absolute monster who was throwing that bag around like it was nothing but a grocery bag at the combine. He's with the Steelers now. So it's just Brock Bowers there. So Utah might have the top tight end dynamic duo in the country right now. So I don't know if you're Traore and once again, if you're Gums, if you're going to want to come in and try to compete with that at the moment. You may be tight end 2. You could end up as 3 and maybe even 4. So that's where it'll be interesting to see what these guys end up deciding to do. But would love to see Gums or Traore as a Ute, obviously. So a lot of talented pass catchers this Utah team is currently talking with right now, which I think is great when you're trying to get more explosive. And man, the Pac-12 offenses this year, when you're talking about Caleb Williams in USC, when you're talking about Michael Penix in Washington, even Arizona was explosive last year. Colorado, we expect to try to do some things, although they have a lot of other roster issues. But in terms of being explosive offense, if Shedeur hits right and is good right away, they should have an explosive offense. Of course, Bo Nix, even UCLA is going to have a lot of stuff. You're going to have to score in the Pac-12, even if Utah has the top defense, which I think they got a great chance to do with so many players returning. But the way to also, what's a great defense? Having a really good offense that allows your defense to rest up, that can run the ball, that can move the chains methodically. And a way to do that is to be complete. And I think adding these receivers in Bridges and Pittman and then potentially Gums and Traore would make this offense even more explosive, would make it even more talented so that it is hard for teams to get them off the field. It's hard to force this Utah team. It's hard to hold them from getting 10 yards and 3 downs, maybe even 4, depending on the down and distance. So I think it would be a great move for this team, and I'm excited to see if they're able to close the deal on Bridges and Pittman. I do expect both Bridges and Pittman to be Utah players. I actually had a question recently asking, like, when do you expect these guys to commit? I mean, look, the players don't really have to report up for the next couple of weeks, so I would be shocked. Look, summer conditioning, all of that gets going right before June kind of starts up. So I would be shocked if Bridges and Pittman don't commit in the next month. I think it'll be in the next couple of weeks, and then it'll be interesting to see Traore and Gums how long they decide to take to make their decision overall. But either way, the Utes should be getting some more help in the pass catching department, more than likely in the receivers. But hey, who's going to complain about adding another talented tight end? So that'll be something that's going to be fun and interesting to watch. Before we get out of here, I want to give a shout out to some couple of former Utes. First of all, Logan Kendall going to the Chicago Bears, or excuse me, being invited to their team mini camp that's getting underway, I believe, right now or in the next couple of days or so. I think it's great for Logan. I think he's got a real shot to actually contribute. Not just, I think he's got a shot to actually make the roster. And I think a lot of you might be listening and be like, that is insane. How is he going to do that? Because Logan can be a heck of a fullback to me. If you're talking about just a dude you want to block and move things, I think about a guy, Patrick Ricard, who was a former defensive lineman the Ravens originally brought in. Then they converted him to a fullback, and he's been awesome back there. I think that's what Logan Kendall can be, just going back to the fullback. I'm sure he's been look, he's already huge, but in terms of bulking up weight, really strong in that regard. Like, so I don't think he'd have to add much more weight, but I do think strength wise, like he did good against Penn State blocking wise. I think he's going to come in and be able to maul guys and really hold his own as a fullback in the NFL. So I think with Justin Fields and that rushing attack they got, Roschon Johnson, the running back they drafted in the 3rd round. And as we said, Fields is one of the best runners in the NFL. I think it makes a lot of sense to bring in Logan Kendall to this offense. So that's going to be something fun to interesting to monitor. And I really think he's got a shot to make that, even though he just got invited to minicamp. I think he's just going to continue to impress the coaches. And I don't know what their fullback situation is, but I think Logan Kendall can be an elite fullback at the NFL level. Going to be interesting to see if he pans out and is one. Also, some XFL news when it relates to the Utes. The XFL Defensive Player of the Year was named, and it's Pita Tomopenu. And I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that name. Did my best to try to type it out as best I could. But either way, we talk about Pita. He forced 4 fumbles, 7.5 sacks, which was tied for second in the XFL, and 26 tackles. Also, those 4 forced fumbles by and away first. And I absolutely understand why he was this Defensive Player of the Year. When you force 4 fumbles in a short season like that, those are the game-changing plays that can absolutely tip a game on its head completely. So I hats off to him. He also put up over 20 sacks at Utah, so we know this guy is a dude when it comes to getting after quarterbacks. So Pita, congrats to him for being the XFL Defensive Player of the Year. Absolutely deserved it. And look, I think he might get, whenever you're the best player in a group of also former college players that just missed out on the NFL, I think he's going to have a chance to get himself invited to one of these mini camps and everything going on. So it's going to be fun to see if he can kind of try to kickstart his NFL career once again after he bounced around the league in his first go around. But hats off to Pito once again for being named the XFL Defensive Player of the Year after having a monster season. So that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. Next week, we'll be talking more recruiting. We'll be talking some of the transfer players that left Utah. Potentially some of these guys will have committed by then, so we'll be discussing them too. And we'll talk about some other past commits that just, in everything going on in spring ball, we weren't able to touch on. So a lot of fun stuff coming up on Locked On Utes. Also, recapping the year that was for Utah athletics, because graduation is getting underway, I think today or tomorrow by the time you guys are listening to this. So for all of you graduates, congrats to everyone who's graduating, wrapping up a great school year overall. And thank all of you for listening to Locked On Utes. And we'll be back next week with more Utah focused content. Have a great weekend.